Good morning, restaurant owners. Welcome to this week's live Facebook training on how to use the accounting, finance, and your key restaurant metrics to improve profits and cash flow. Let me share my screen and we will get to this week's presentation, which is a continuation of last week's. And we're presenting on stop guessing and start scheduling, build a labor budget that works for you. This is part 2 of training on building the ideal labor budget. So last week we explored the ideal labor, what that really means for you and your restaurant conceptually, and how to challenge what you're thinking about every task in your restaurant. Is this the best way to do that? Is this the best person to be performing that task? Should someone else be doing that work? And also listening to your team as they're on the front line, and they have probably better insight on how things should be done, and even looking at your restaurant's layout. Is this the most efficient way for everybody to move around the front of house, the back of house, especially in the kitchen area? So challenging all your concepts on what the minor little things you can change to improve your labor budget. This week, we're going to get into the hands-on on the practical tools to turn those concepts into an actual labor schedule and a labor budget that you can actually hit and start to improve that labor prime cost percentage. Your outcome from both of these, part 1 and part 2, is you're going to leave with actionable steps to implement a labor management system that balances service quality with profitability. Okay, the first step is the key performance indicators. What are we measuring to make sure that we're implementing and changing our labor to hit the ideal labor budget? So those KPIs, those key performance indicators, are sales per labor hour, customers per labor hour, your labor cost percentage, which basically is your prime cost percentage, and there's different percentages for front of house and back of house. And what is our average hourly rate? So we're going to get into, and this week I'm going to pull over a lot of actual schedules. So I'm going to be going back and forth between this presentation and actual spreadsheets. The first is the period sales and labor log, and these are the KPIs. And there's a lot of numbers here. Let me blow that up just a little bit. So you can see all this information is in white is information that you're populating every day into this schedule. It's the guest count from your point of sale system, the total number of checks, the sales for the day, labor hours, and you might have to go into the payroll system, but your point of sale probably will give you the total labor hours. And if you have hourly rates plugged into your point of sale system, it will probably give your labor cost. But you may need to go to your labor system, your payroll system, to get that labor cost number. And then these columns in blue, they just start to calculate these KPIs. Per person average, that is your total guest count divided by the number of labor hours, your check average. That's actually the number, the guest count divided by the total sales. But the key ones are the average hourly pay rate and your labor cost percentage, sales per hour, and number of guests per labor hour. And those numbers just come from dividing labor cost percentage is your labor cost divided by the total sales percentage. The average hourly pay rate is the total labor cost divided by the total number of hours. Your sales per labor hour is the total sales divided by the number of labor hours. And you just start to populate this schedule on a daily basis. Take 5 minutes every day, not even 5 minutes. If your sensitive information is coming from the labor costs from the payroll report, maybe you actually have to go in there, but someone else on your team can populate everything else. And then it just continues to calculate. And these are the KPIs. Labor cost percentage and sales per labor hour are the most important. that you just start to measure to see if some of the tools that we're going to show you in the next 10 or 15 minutes are having an impact on lowering that labor cost. Okay. So your schedule should be based on productivity. If you remember, last week, we ended by talking about focused observation, walking around your restaurant on a daily basis, you and your key managers, and understanding at each customer number per hour, how many staff do you need? How many of your servers do you need if you have 50 customers per hour? And those customer accounts per hour can come right from your point of sale system. How many bussers, bartenders, hostess, line cook, dishwasher, executive chef, that may be one of your salaried employees, one of your key managers. Whatever your position names are and whatever it takes to staff your restaurant, you want to understand each different customer account per hour, how many people does it take? So that's counting the starting point from last week to forecast, and then we get into forecasting customer accounts and sales. The point of sales data, your point of sale system may have AI built into it already to forecast the coming sales for next week, the week after, the following week. Margin Edge is one of our key tools that we use to manage your vendor bills, and it picks up all your point of sale information once that's linked in. And in other weeks, we talk about linking all your tools so that you get a comprehensive financial reporting package. There are different ways to forecast and predict your business volume. You want to analyze 3 and 6 week averages and adjust for local events, weather, and holidays so that you have an idea of what your sales and your customer count should be in the coming week. So from that, so that's the starting point. Then you start to identify peak periods. And you're identifying peak periods by filling in and building these schedules. These numbers are schedule numbers, so I can keep all this straight today. The first is customer counts. Again, this is just data you're pulling from your point of sale system for each shift, for lunch, dinner, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And by week, what is the average customer count for each of these time frames, lunch and dinner, each of these shifts? And then it starts to build out a 3-week average and a 6-week average. And you can start to identify the low points. Sunday lunch is a low point. Friday dinner is a high point. And exactly what is the customer count for that day, so you can start to look at this schedule, which we started to build from last week's training, and identify how many people do I need in each of these shifts if the average customer count are at these levels. Okay, so you're compiling data. There's a lot of detail here, a lot of data points, but it helps you refine and cut even 2 or 3% from your labor budget has a huge impact on the bottom line. So it's worth the effort to go through and pull all this data from point of sale, from your payroll system, and what have you, to build this information so you have this top of mind on how many people you need for each shift. And you can refine it even further by taking your customer counts and blow that up a little bit by hour, so that you know your peak periods, your Friday dinner, 6:30, 7, 7:30, 8 p.m. Those are when the highest customer counts are, and those may look low for your restaurant. The data is the data from your particular restaurant. That's why you need to pull that information from your point of sale system and start to build this information so you understand not just from, yeah, I know that it's in my mind, but actual data of customer accounts so you can start to build the ideal schedule and the ideal labor budget. So building the strategic schedule, we talked about identifying peak periods. forecasting customer accounts in the future so you understand next week how many customers are we anticipating in those low periods and in those peak periods, and whether or not it's going to be impacted by weather or events or a holiday. And then you can start to build this strategic schedule. I don't know why that little thing is in the way there. Okay. So you can match staffing to the forecasted demand. Apply the staffing, master staffing to the worksheet. That's what this is. So you're looking at every hour, and this is a particular day of the week on Friday. Every hour you're open during that day, how many of each position should I be scheduling? How many should I anticipate needing at each hour during that day? So this takes some work. You have to do this for every day of the week, and you're looking at the data for the forecast, and you're looking at the data that we just accumulated for identifying peak periods and how many staff do you need during those peak periods. Then you can start to build out a schedule based on all this information so that you don't have idle hands in your restaurant, and you're also not getting slammed and being understaffed, and your quality of your service goes way down and you can't keep up with demand during those peak periods. So each job, server, grill, fry, whatever. This is not a complete schedule, but whatever it would be for your restaurant, and for each day and for each time frame, you're building out that schedule, 9 to 5, so that you can start to build out what is the weekly budget, and based on projected sales, is that going to get me the labor percentage that I need? So some of these things, some of these data points, we actually help our customers accumulate, but the actual scheduling, you or one of your managers needs to build this out so that you can start to calculate for every day what is the total cost, what are the total hours, and it accumulates the total cost in hours so that you can start to look at some of those KPIs and say, does my forecast, when I'm forecasting for sales, does my labor budget make sense, not only by staffing guidelines, but also by total labor budget, total cost, labor cost for that budget. Okay. Calculate the projected labor costs before finalizing. Apply the master staffing worksheet and guidelines. So your schedule should reflect hourly guest patterns, not just daily totals. This precision scheduling leads to significant labor cost savings while maintaining service quality. And I'll repeat myself and say it again. This is a lot of data points that we have to accumulate, but if it's adding tens of thousands of dollars to your bottom line over the course of a year, it's well worth the effort. And once it becomes routine, it is not that much effort. So from that, you're producing a projected labor budget. And that's what this is. This is, we already peeked ahead and looked at this, but from all that data, you're combining forecasting customer counts and staffing guidelines. You're calculating a projected labor hours by position and by day. You're multiplying by average hourly wage for each position, and you sum all those to get a projected labor cost. And then you compare that to what your projected sales are, either from AI capabilities in Margin Edge. Your point of sale system might already have AI capabilities built in it to project out sales. However, and if you're manually projecting sales, that's fine. You just need to factor in all those details of weather, seasonal fluctuations, special promotions, or events in your neighborhood, training periods for new staff. So your budget matches what you're projecting for the next week. And then you can also start to build templates. If you're using 7 Shifts or some other scheduling software, you can start to build templates. You could have a dozen or 25 templates built and label those templates so you understand what that template is based on, what kind of sales volume and what kind of customer count volume so that you're starting with a template and then you can adjust that template in the fine details based on your forecast. Shift management in action. This is the last thing I'm going to pull over. It's called a shift management, shift roster management shift card, manager shift card. That's easy for me to say. It's a little mini day planner for your shift managers to record actual versus schedule hours, track sales by hour compared to the forecast, and make on-the-fly staffing adjustments. And here's what that would look like for a typical restaurant. It just shows you the number of servers, every position broken down, schedule, in, out, hours. That's what the schedule was, and actual what's happening. So that if one of your servers doesn't show up, you know that maybe you need to, you have a dual trained bartender, and maybe one of those bartenders needs to take over some of the server duties while you find a backup bartender or kitchen staff or busser. Maybe one of your bussers or dishwashers is cross-trained as a server. You move around this roster as the day goes, and it allows them to make adjustments. And also based on, as we said back here, based on actual sales versus projected sales, or actual customer counts versus projected customer counts, maybe you start to need to send some people home if the weather turns bad and you've got a snowstorm on your hands all of a sudden. Those are goofy examples, but they apply. And then in your weekly manager meetings, you're reviewing these shift cards, you're reviewing actual versus budget on some of the KPIs, so that you can compare and identify meal periods where productivity slipped or recognize successful scheduling patterns, so that you're always after action reviewing and making adjustments and learning and training your staff on how to schedule effectively and build the ideal labor budget. So it's a continuous labor management cycle. It starts with forecasting and understanding what you're expecting for next week. You then schedule, create staffing plans based on productivity targets and based on what the forecast is for customer counts and sales, and what you know about how many people it takes, how many of your team it takes for each customer count and sales level. Then you're executing and adjusting in real time during service using those shift cards. And then you're reviewing and analyze with your team the performance to refine your approach. So if today's labor cost strategies hit home and you're ready to turn this into real profit, click on the link below. I'm going to leave a comment below that has a link to my calendar. I would love to talk to you about you and your restaurant. We'll do a profits and cash flow analysis. We can talk about labor management. We can talk about anything going on in your restaurant. I love talking to restaurant owners. And let's schedule a time, get together, and talk about your restaurant. Next week, the training will be on Tuesday afternoon, a little bit early. I'll be traveling on Wednesday. We'll see you then. Have a great week.